The original New Testament was written in Greek, which was then translated into Latin via the Vulgate and/or into English via the Tyndale Bible or King James Bible by later Christian scribes in the Middle Ages and later. This is made even more curious when one acknowledges that Jesus' sayings would have been spoken in Aramaic, the common language in Judea at that time, not Greek, which means our modern Bible is at best a translation of a translation, and in some circumstances a translation of a translation of a translation of what Jesus originally would have said, from Aramaic to Greek to Latin or English. I digress. What if I told you that our modern Bible has been changed, and that the Bible of 2,000 years ago is different than the Bible that survives today? Would you believe me? Well, you don't have to, because this is no secret. Even Christian and Jewish scholars will acknowledge this fact. Again, something you don't typically learn in church is that unlike in my childhood dream, there is not some thousands of years old master copy of the Bible under lock and key in the Vatican or Library of Congress. In truth, the Bible and the books it contains today, the Gospel of Matthew or Exodus, are based on copies upon copies upon copies of more ancient texts until you get to the now lost quote-unquote originals. It may be best to illustrate this concept by example. This is a clear oversimplification of the truth, by the way. It's not really a simple linear path of descent, but you get the idea. The Bible you might find placed in a dirty motel nightstand is a Gideon's Bible, named after a Christian organization that tries to distribute as many copies of this Bible as possible across the world. Now, these Bibles are often in the ESV or English Standard Version published in 2001. They have been rendered into modern English to best suit a 21st century audience. The ESV is itself a translation of the Revised Standard Version of 1952, which is itself a revision of the American Standard Version of 1901, which is a translation of the English Revised Version of the late 1800s, which is finally a revision of the King James Version published in 1611. The King James Version of the Bible is the granddaddy to pretty much all later English translations. Staying with me so far? So you might be noticing that there is a huge gap between 1611 and 33 AD, when Jesus supposedly died. Where exactly did the King James Bible come from? Well, the King James used several sources for its translation. For the Old Testament, it used a translation into English of the Greek Masoretic texts, or MT, primarily copied, edited, and distributed by a group of Jews known as the Masoretes between the 7th and 10th centuries AD. The oldest surviving copy of one of these texts dated to around the 9th century. But then again, the 7th and 10th centuries are 700 to 1000 years away from Jesus. Where did these come from? Well, these Masoretic texts are themselves copies based off of a now lost older text and an older one still, until we finally reach the original Old Testament of the Bible, which has been lost to time. A similar thing can be done with the New Testament, where copies of copies of copies, some lost, some surviving, can trace us back to the text written shortly after the time of Jesus. In any case, what you begin to find is that the foundations of our modern Bibles are in truth based off of only a few lines of these copies of the originals. And when you zoom out, there's an entire web of different cousin Bible lines, working parallel to the ones our modern Bibles have used, like the MT line or the Vulgate line, that can be mapped out like a family tree, all of them being able to trace back to the original text created thousands of years ago. For instance, we have the Vulgate, a Latin version of the Bible used in Catholic churches, which shares a common origin text with the MT, but contains unmistakable differences. Archaeology has been of crucial importance to biblical scholarship. For hundreds of years, archaeologists have been uncovering older versions of the Bible, buried in ancient houses or in caves dated all the way back to the 1st century AD and BC. For instance, we have the Codex Sinaiticus, or B, written in Greek sometime around the 300s AD, and kept in the Vatican Library since at least the 15th century. It is one of the oldest copies of the Bible in its recognizable form. Codex Sinaiticus, written around 330 to 360 AD, is held today in the British Library in London. We have fragmentary documents of Aquila of Sinope's translation of the Bible, written in the 2nd century. Even older copies of individual books as opposed to complete Bibles can be found even further back. Papyrus 66, discovered in Egypt and dated to around 200 AD, is a near-complete codex of the Gospel of John. The famous Dead Sea Scrolls, a collection of ancient manuscripts, provide us some of the oldest and extensive copies of the Old Testament. Although all these documents and manuscripts are mere copies of originals, they nonetheless are valuable to us. Scholars have uncovered literally hundreds of different copies of texts from the Bible, and what they have discovered about these texts is that, when compared with one another, say Papyrus 75 with Codex Sinaiticus, or the MT with the Dead Sea Scrolls, the texts generally read the same, if not near exactly in most places. But in others, they vary. They can be different in minor and even major ways. How do we know the Bible has been changed? These areas of alteration or change between biblical copies are called textual variants. Wikipedia has an entire page dedicated to cataloging the work of biblical scholars and identifying these points of variation. Almost every text we discover there appears to be dozens of differences when it is compared with others. These changes likely occur during copyings of older versions of the text.
Mm-hmm.